Hello, my name is C.E. Withrow. You can call me Kat, and today I am going to be going into things that I wish I had known before I self published and the questions that I think you should consider if you're thinking about self publishing. I am an indie author. I published my debut novel, Daisy Plucked, last October, so I have about a year of experience being in the indie author space, although the publishing process started months and months before that. Daisy Plucked is a Sapphic Hamlet retelling about a girl named Daisy and her lifelong best friend and very recent ex girlfriend, Hannah, who everyone thinks committed suicide, but then Hannah's ghost shows up to Daisy after her funeral and says, "Hey, actually it wasn't suicide, I was murdered and you're the only one who can solve it." I love this book. I'm so glad that I self-published it. I'm so proud of it. But there are definitely things that I didn't know would be part of the self-publishing journey that I think other people should think about and consider. So I've got like 6 big questions that you should ask yourself before self-publishing. So let's get into them. The first question to ask yourself is, are you okay with doing 100% of the marketing for your release? I say this because in self-publishing, the amount of effort that you put into marketing and trying to sell your book is probably going to directly correlate to how many sales you make, how much money you make off of your book, how many copies get out there. So you really do have to think about how much effort you can put into marketing. So for example, I was going through some just mental health stuff around the time my book came out, and then a couple months later, right as I was starting to get a little bit mentally better, my uncle passed away really unexpectedly. And so I basically did not promote my book for months. So after my initial wave of sales from when I've been like hyping it up and doing pre-orders and stuff for a while, I honestly haven't made an online sale in like months and months because I've just been focusing on other things. And when you're not talking about your book online, nobody knows about it. People aren't going to just find out about your book organically the way they might with a traditionally published book, because they're not going to stumble across it in a bookstore unless you put in the effort to, get placement in bookstores. They're not going to see it on the list in a magazine. They're not going to see it with a book talker or a booktuber unless you are the one, putting the effort into sending out marketing information about your book to these people. Just think about realistically how much time and energy you're willing to put in to marketing and promoting your book. And it can feel kind of cringy at times to be like, read my book, read my book, read my book. That's something that I struggle with a lot because I put so much time and effort and I'm so proud of this book. But sometimes it's really hard to say like, hey, buy my book. And then if nobody does, it feels very personal. The next question is, kind of a sensitive topic, I guess. I don't know. I don't really see a lot of videos about self-publishing talking too much about this, and that is the expenses. You have to fully fund your book up front. You're not getting an advance from a publisher. You're not guaranteed to sell X number of books. You also are splitting your time between a bunch of different things. One of the first things that you have to do when you start really deciding to self-publish a book is get professional editing done. You don't have to do this, I guess, but if you're putting in the effort to self-publish, getting a professional editor will dramatically increase the quality of your work. I did, I believe, 3 rounds of edits with my editor that I worked with. She's amazing. I'm going to link her website in the description because I loved working with her. She made my book so much better and so much stronger. We did a round of something called developmental edits, which was like her commenting on the story and just the overall flow and things like that. And then a beta reading kind of edit where I'd fixed a lot of stuff from the developmental edit and now we're into the next thing. And then finally line editing, and they cost various amounts depending on who you work with, where you go, what kind of like expectations you have. I found my editor through an editor that I follow on TikTok, and I had reached out to her about working on my book, and her timeline was not in line with what I was thinking. I had reached out to her in February, and I want to say that she wasn't available until like September or October to do edits, which just wasn't something that I was interested. Like I wanted to publish my book ASAP because I had been working on it for so long at that point and had pursued traditional publishing and then decided to self-publish. So that first editor that I reached out to had a really long, backlog wait list, but she recommended a couple other editors in her like automatic email that came when you reached out with queries. I really love my editor, but I did spend probably $1,500 to $1,800 on editing alone. Another thing that a lot of indie authors spend money on is cover design, book design. I personally designed my cover and everything myself because I have a background with graphic design and I'm a very creative person. I can't draw or paint, but I made this in Photoshop using I use cyanotype paper, which is a paper that's blue, and then when you put it in the sun, it changes colors. These were actually from wooden block letters that I got from like Michaels, and I put them on the piece of paper and spelled out Daisy Plucked, a novel, C. Withrow, and I also got an actual Daisy and did the same thing with cyanotype, and then I just edited this together And it took me probably 10 to 15 hours of work, I want to say, because I was just playing around with it and just seeing what I liked. I don't even know how I got this color. I just was playing around with different color filters and things. So if you want to get a cover made by someone else, it can run from like hundreds of dollars to as much as you want to spend. I'm considering for my next book commissioning a painter to paint the cover, but I'm not entirely sure that I want to do indie publishing for my next one. So we'll put a pin in that. But as an indie author, all of the costs are on you. All of editing, cover design, and other like miscellaneous costs that can pop up. Like if you want to get author copies, you have to pay for them. You know, it's usually comes out to around $6 a book with shipping when I order kind of in bulk. But you know, that can add up, and shipping is pretty expensive because books are heavy, so makes sense. That also means that if you want to like send PR to influencers, you're paying for everything that goes in that PR box. If you're being traditionally published, a publisher would be paying for this and putting this together, and instead you're the one doing everything. So it costs time, money. It's just something you really should consider and think about during this process. And continuing to talk about money, are you okay with never making back the money that you spent on your book? So like I said, I've probably spent a couple $1,000s on Daisy Plucked over the past year between editing, ordering copies, things like that. And I haven't made back that money yet on book sales. I've sold somewhere just under like 200 copies, which I'm so grateful for everyone who buys a copy of my book. But I use Draft2Digital to publish online. And through that, my ebook costs $3.99 and I get $2.37 in royalties off of each ebook, which is pretty decent. However, my paperback is listed at $14.99 and the amount of royalties that I get off of each sale of a $15 book is $1.28. And that's because, you know, it costs me to print, to send to the distributor, shipping, all that stuff. And the way that I make the most money is I will buy author copies in bulk and I go to different book fairs. I've done some book signings through my local Barnes & Nobles. But again, I'm putting in the effort to do these things and I still have definitely not broken even on the amount of money that I put in. And I think that that's pretty common for indie authors. I mean, I guess I can't speak for everybody, and you know, it definitely depends on your genre and your niche and how much money you spent putting into your book, but getting enough sales to cover the cost of editing is hard. So it's just something you have to be okay with. You know, maybe everything goes great and your book blows up and you have like an Age of Scorpius with good writing kind of situation where you sell, you know, 6,000 copies and everything's hunky-dory and great. Realistically, it doesn't happen very often. It can, and I'm not trying to yuck your yum. I'm not saying that like your book isn't good enough to sell 6,000 copies. Not at all. Not even close to what I'm saying. But you have to prepare yourself for kind of the worst case scenario where you sell very few books. Maybe just like your friends and family buy them. If you're okay with that and you're okay with like I came up with the idea for this story in 2017 and I started writing it in 2021, finished writing it in 2022, and then started querying it, got only rejections. It's hard to get queer literature published, and honestly the book probably needed a little bit of work. So I gave up and I decided to self-publish. That was my personal journey, and because of that I felt very passionate about my book getting out into the world, and I don't regret self-publishing. I'm okay with the fact that I might never make back my initial investment from this because I'm proud of it. I love it and I'm glad I did it, but only you can answer whether or not that will be true for you as well. The next thing to consider is that you have to think about if you're okay with having no like professional support system the way you would if you're being traditionally published. Traditionally published authors have a literary agent who's helping them navigate what's going on, all that fun stuff. But if you're an indie author, you don't have an agent that you're working with. You know, you might have an editor that you're working with, you might have friends who are indie authors, you might make connections online, but at the same time, it's not the same as having somebody whose job it is to help you through this process. And you're going to have to be okay with doing your own research, with trying to figure out the right quote unquote next steps to take. Sometimes it can be confusing. There's a lot of conflicting advice out there, and you won't have one single source of truth who's a person who's gone through it that's there to help you. And as someone who loves research, I love looking stuff up. I love digging my claws into a new subject. So I kind of enjoyed the challenge of self-publishing because navigating it and figuring it out was exciting to me, I guess, is the best way to put it. And again, there are tons of resources out there for indie authors. I've definitely like gone and sought them out myself. I'll link a couple that I like in the description, but again, it's not the same as having someone who's, you know, part of their job and part of how they make their income is shepherding you through this process. Another thing that you have to be okay with is managing your kind of marketing calendar. So any events you want to do, if you want to do a book signing somewhere, if you want to, sell your books at a book fair or some sort of market or event or anything like that, you have to be the one who organizes all of it, gets all the stock and the products for it, sets up your storefront, goes there in tables. You have to make the connections with bookstores to go in and have them potentially stock your books or have them host a signing for you, something like that. You are going to be responsible for reaching out and doing that work. That's something that I have kind of struggled with a little bit here and there. Again, I have depression and anxiety. So I did a book fair in February. I got the card of a woman who works at a Barnes & Noble in my city, and I ended up reaching out to her like a month later because I also got sick right after the book fair. Oh, I got the stomach flu. It was rough. So I reached out to her, set that up, and she gave me the contact info for another store. I literally just reached out to her like a couple of weeks ago because I was also dealing with some health issues from like March to honestly July. I kind of started to feel I had like severely low iron. I got diagnosed with PCOS. It was a whole thing. But because of that stuff, I wasn't doing signings. I wasn't promoting my book. I wasn't posting on social media. I didn't get any sales for months because of things that I did. I also went to something called the Lucky Flea Market here in Rochester. It's like on Sundays, and there's like vintage clothes and handmade stuff. And I was like, I'm going to try tabling at this. So I went and I lost money on the event because I sold, I think, like 8 books. I was there for 6 hours. It was awful, honestly. Like, it was miserable sitting there and nobody buying my book. And honestly, like 6 of those sales happened in the first like 2 hours. So then after that, it was just me sitting there waiting. And it was kind of depressing. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't the best. But, I lost money on that too. And that's okay. Like, that's just how it is. You have to be okay with things like that happening. If you know that you will get like viscerally upset if you go to a book fair or whatever and nobody buys your book, maybe get a little bit of a tougher, thicker skin before going into indie publishing. Because I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying that it's a possibility. And I mean, it happened to me. And it was upsetting, but I was able to kind of like emotionally deal with it. And also another thing with having your own events is that if you want to have anything besides your book, like bookmarks, stickers, prints, whatever, you are going to be responsible for making and producing those. I have a cousin who is a great artist, and she drew up some cute little like prints of different places that are in my book. My book is set in Rochester, which people who are from Rochester love Rochester. So I asked my cousin to draw up some different like pictures of locations that are in the book, and I sell those at book fairs along with my book, just so I have something else on my table and it's not just a stack of purple books. And it costs money to buy the supplies, to buy the ink for my printer. Even though I print at home, it still was kind of pricey. And I also kind of overbought stuff at first because I didn't know what to expect. And that's another, cost to consider, again, if this is something that you can't do at home. And the final thing that you need to consider is whether or not you want to traditionally publish in the future. It's definitely possible to go from indie publishing to traditionally publishing your next novel or project, whatever it is that you write, whatever genre it is, but it can be kind of a red flag or a detractor for potential agents and editors. I know that when I was querying for Daisy Plucked, there were quite a few different agents who had like the query tracker forms or query manager, whatever it's called. And something that they ask is like, have you ever published a book before? And it's yes or no. And they ask how many copies you've sold. If you self-publish and you decide, okay, I'm going to keep using my same author name from my first book, and I'm going to query this book to be traditionally published, and your first book, you only sold like 50 copies to your friends and family, still super cool to sell 50 copies of your book. Like, that's crazy. That's so many people. But, you sell 50 copies and you tell an agent that, and they're going to go, okay, so you have tried to publish before and you didn't get really the numbers that we'd be looking for. So definitely something to consider. And, it might not factor in. It might. You can also, if you self-publish a book and it doesn't work out and then you want to traditionally publish later, you can, use a different pen name or different spelling of your name, whatever you want to do. And that's all I have for right now. You should just barely see my dog. Just see the snoot. It's almost time to take her OUT for a WALK, so she's getting a little antsy. So those are the things that I think are important to consider before going through with self-publishing. I think self-publishing is great. I think that especially for, queer or BIPOC voices, it can be really empowering because it is harder to get books published that are about queer people, people of color, other marginalized communities. So it can be great to just be like, you know what, I don't have to go through this old power structure. I can do what I want. And I love self-publishing for that. But just because it's for me doesn't mean that it has to be for everybody. Just because it's not for you doesn't mean that it's bad. Just because it is for you doesn't mean that's good. We're not assigning moral judgments to indie publishing. We're just here to vibe, you know? So if you have any other questions about self-publishing, let me know in the comments. I can make more videos about this. I feel like I probably had a pretty smooth process in theory. If you really like this video and you want to support me, my book is linked in the description, so you can pick up a copy, paperback or ebook, from all of the popular online retailers. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you for watching and happy writing. Bye!